I'm Victoria from Biblio Lifestyle, and you're listening to the Reader's Couch podcast, the show that will help you bridge the gap between living a full and busy life to one where you're reading, learning new things, and having fun. Today on the couch, I'm so excited to welcome author Tasha Coryell to talk about her novel, Love Letters to a Serial Killer. In Love Letters to a Serial Killer, we meet a young woman named Hannah, who, fresh after a breakup, finds herself really drawn to true crime. Now we see Hannah become obsessed with the murders of 4 women in Atlanta. And when a suspect is named in the case, and while he awaits trial, she starts writing letters to him. Now at first, her letters share her disdain for him, but then the tone starts to change. And after his acquittal, their romance escalates, and she moves in with him, even though she's not sure that he's innocent, and we see her become obsessed with solving the murders herself. So in this episode, we talk about Tasha's novel, Love Letters to a Serial Killer, but we also talk about real-life male serial killers that women fall in love with. We also learn more about Tasha's reading and writing life, plus lots more. But before we get into the episode, please take a few seconds to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It really helps the show. And if you have something you'd like to share, click the Send Me a Text link in the show's description, or you can use Spotify's Q&A feature. And let me know what you think about this episode. Let me know if you've read Love Letters to a Serial Killer. Let me know if you've watched any documentaries about real-life serial killers and the women that fall in love with them. Or you can tell me about the last book that you read and loved. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. So thanks in advance. And now onto the episode with author Tasha Coryell. Hi friends, welcome again to the Reader's Couch. I'm your host, Victoria Wood, and here on the couch with me to talk about her debut novel, Love Letters to a Serial Killer, is author Tasha Coryell. Hi Tasha, welcome to the Reader's Couch.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yay, I'm thrilled to have you on the show. Can't wait to talk about your debut, Love Letters to a Serial Killer. But before we get into the details of the book, how are you feeling? This is your very first book, baby. How excited are you?
I'm very excited. I'm also very anxious. I can't necessarily identify what I'm anxious about, but it's very strange to have worked on something for such a long time and have it out in the world. I sold the book in October 2022, and they were like, oh yeah, it'll be published in the summer of 2024. And in my head, that was not a real year or like a real season that would actually happen. So right now we're 2 weeks away, and I'm like, wow, this is real? Like it's actually going to come out?
Yeah, I know. I can't even imagine. First, it was just you and your book, and then a few people like on the publishing team getting it together. And now everyone will have an opinion. So I get the anxious bits. I think that's pretty normal.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's normal. I know a lot of people who have books, and before their books came out, they would always describe how they were feeling. And I don't think I entirely grasped it until I had similar experiences myself.
Absolutely. Guess what? The book is here. Readers will be able to just go in a bookstore or a library to get their hands on a copy. So tell all listeners about Love Letters to a Serial Killer. What can they expect when they pick up a book? Essentially, what's your elevator pitch?
Yeah, so Love Letters to a Serial Killer is about a woman in her 30s. I like to think of it as a very millennial novel. So she's working this job at a nonprofit where she really wanted to make a difference, but she finds herself really underpaid and unappreciated. And she's dating this guy. I say dating, but they're not really dating. They're more just like sleeping together, who's a bum, and he's not really into her. And to cope with all of these things in her life, she gets really into true crime, specifically this case about a serial killer. And she starts writing the serial killer while he is in jail awaiting his trial. And she goes from condemning his actions to falling in love with him. And she has to figure out whether or not he's guilty. And she has to figure out whether or not she wants him to be guilty. Is she in love with him because he's a serial killer? Or Or is she in love with him because of who he is as a person and she thinks he might be innocent?
So I have to tell you, full disclosure, when I saw the name of this book, Love Letters to a Serial Killer, and I read the brief pitch that I got in my email, I immediately thought of Richard Ramirez and Doreen Leoy because it was just front of mind. I probably had just watched something recently on the ID channel where they were talking about it. So that was front of mind. And in history, there have been folks who have fallen in love with serial killers. So my question to you is, one, were you familiar with if not Richard Ramirez, then someone else? Were you familiar with people falling in love with serial killers? And also, what inspired you to write this novel?
What's so funny is you mentioned Richard Ramirez, and that isn't even like a serial killer relationship that I thought of. There were actually other serial killer relationships that inspired this. So I went through a period where I was very into reading older true crime. There's the book by Anne Rule, The Stranger Beside Me, where she talks about her friendship with Ted Bundy before he was known as a serial killer. And they had a platonic relationship, but Ted Bundy very infamously impregnated a woman while he was on trial, which the logistics of are still confusing to me. And then I also read Helter Skelter, which is about Charles Manson and the Manson girls, and he had a whole slew of women who were in love with him. So it's actually very common, I think, for people to fall in love with serial killers. Like, I think we can't help but be fascinated by it. And I think that I, like a lot of people, was fascinated by these serial killers that I was reading about, but I was also interested in the women that fell in love with them. Who are these people that go so far as to fall in love with a serial killer? And I think that it's really easy to condemn them. But at the same time, we're the ones who are giving these killers an audience. We're the ones watching the documentaries, reading the books, listening to the podcasts. So I think that we can't totally be judgmental of them.
No, I agree. We can't be completely judgmental of them. And I think you try to answer that question and shed light on a woman who falls in love with a serial killer, but also trying to not let the reader judge them too harshly. And in this case, our main character is Hannah, and we see her become obsessed with a serial killer who she was first drawn to attention to all of this because of 4 murders that happened in Atlanta. And she saw when a suspect was put on trial. Like you said, she wrote letters. First, it started off very condemning and she was really venting her disdain for this person. But then it turns into something different. They end up exchanging more personal notes about each other. And then he ends up being acquitted, and then their romance escalates. So we see her really trying to decide whether or not he's innocent, whether or not he's not. She's also trying to decide whether she cares or not. And it just really goes off the rails from there. Outside of the serial killers that we just talked about briefly, the Ted Bundy and Carol Ann Boone, I mentioned Richard Ramirez because I know I had watched something on ID before reading this book, so it was top of mind. I also thought of the Menendez brothers because there was one brother that married one woman at first, and they were married for maybe 5 or 6 years, I can't remember. And then he married someone else, and they were married for almost like 20 years. And the reason the first wife broke up with, I think it was Lyle. Yeah. The reason she broke up with him was because she found out he was writing letters to other women. So it was clearly obvious that this man had lots of suitors. So outside of the serial killer element, which it's clear there are real women in real life who are obsessed with serial killers, and you wrote a story, a fictional story, mind you, about one. What else drew you to the serial killer narrative, plus your experiences?
I would say a couple of things drew me to this. I mentioned I got really into true crime, and I think that was also linked. I started reading a lot of thrillers. Obviously, this book is a thriller, but in a weird way, I think that I used that kind of reading as a kind of escapism from things that were going on in the world. I used to be a big reader of literary fiction, and I still read literary fiction, but I had this moment where I was like, oh my gosh, things feel so bad in the world around me. There were a lot of things going on in my personal life, and I was like, I just don't have the attention span to read something that is very thought challenging. I just want to read a mystery. I just want to wonder who's done it, or read about these other very bad things to distract me from the badness that's right in front of me, which is what Hannah does in the book, right? Her life around her is not what she thought it would be. And so she uses true crime and her fascination with these serial killers to escape from the world. And it sounds so counterintuitive. Like, why would you want to read about bad things because you're experiencing bad things? But I think there's something escapist about this.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm also curious about your relationship with true crime presently. So you've written this book. Are there any true crime podcasts you listen to, true crime shows? What kind of true crime content are you consuming?
I would say that I am not, like, I like true crime, but I am not a obsessive true crime person. Like, I watch the big documentaries that everyone else does. I really loved the documentary series about Michelle McNamara's book, which I forget the title of, I'll Be Gone in the Dark. But I would say I'm not a totally true crime obsessed person. I think what sparked my interest more than anything is that I lived in Alabama for 11 years, and they have a prison system that's so horrible that it's been ruled inhumane. And they haven't done anything to fix it. Like, it's been ruled by an international level. They're like, your prisons are so bad. You treat people so poorly. This goes against what any conditions that people should be held in. In 2014, I actually taught creative writing at one of the prisons. And it was a really informative experience for me, because it's not like you go there and you meet people who are in prison and you're like, oh, wow, you're a monster. Like, that's not what it's like at all. Like, you go and you're like, oh, these are just people. And I didn't know what they had done. And certainly some of them had probably done very bad things, but they were still worthy of talking to and listening to. And I walked away from the experience both very perturbed by the conditions that they were living in, but also with an appreciation for humanity and understanding that people are more complicated than maybe the crimes that they've committed. And so I think I was very interested in the flaws in our criminal justice system and the things that were going on in the prisons in Alabama. And I think that struck my interest more so than the overall true crime genre.
Okay, that makes sense. And it's really cool to hear, actually. I guess another question would be, why do you think folks are so obsessed with true crime? I'm the person who will watch a documentary here and there. I can't say I've consumed true crime podcast really heavy. I'll maybe listen to an episode if a friend sends it my way. But what do you think is this fascination with society at large, with just consuming this content? Because there's so many shows and documentaries. And again, like I said, podcasts, there's so much media around it that, I mean, right now, everything I see true crime is revolving around the most recent Gilgo Beach killings. So that's a thing, because I think he was recently charged with more crimes or 2 other victims. So of course, there's more content being churned out about that in real time. So what do you think is part of the reason why society is so obsessed?
I think it's partially a gossip thing. Like, true crime and killers, it's like almost like we live in this like global small town where everyone's like talking about that like weird person down the street and being like, oh, did you hear what he did? But I also feel like in terms of men that we hold up as being attractive, a lot of times they are really bad. If you think of the trope of bad boys in movies, or serial or superheroes, they kill people all the time and we love them. I think there's an attraction to badness. So one of the things that I like to talk about a lot and thinking about the origins of this book is when I was a teenager, I read the Twilight books and I was too cool to really admit that I liked them. Like I was like, oh, I'm reading these ironically, but I don't really like them. But there was a part of me that did really like them. And now that I'm an adult, I can admit to that. And I was really attracted to Edward. And Edward is like constantly talking about how he's a killer. And Bella absolutely doesn't care. She's, no, I want to be a killer too. Like we want to be killers together. And she's attracted to him because he's like this vampire that's killed a bunch of people. It's fine, I think, when they're fictional, right? We're totally okay with a society is being in love and attracted to fictional bad boys. And then we're disturbed when it becomes more real. But I think there is an element where we hold up bad boys. And I think part of it, I think it helps men to get away with things. It's, oh, I might be condemned for being bad, but women will love me. And it is them almost to become these people.
You know what? When you gave that Twilight example, and of course in film and in other forms of media, when it comes to like entertainment, fictional stuff, I was just like thinking, I was like, oh my gosh, you are making valid points here. For some reason, we excuse that because again, it's not real, but we're still fixated when it is. Yeah, that's quite an interesting take, I have to say. Now, outside of the serial killer culture, serial killer fixation, I feel, and outside of this being a really interesting thriller that has those twists throughout that we've come to know and expect, this was also, I feel, a novel that really takes a close look at dating, specifically modern relationships and dating culture and American society at large. Tell me about your decisions. Like, first, we have Hannah, who is in a relationship or not so much of a relationship. Let's call it a situationship with someone. And she feels like getting to that other side where having a relationship, having a family, living a comfortable life, having, I guess you could say, the white picket fence, for lack of a better description. It feels incredibly elusive to her. And after her breakup, she finds herself being drawn to true crime for entertainment, but then becomes obsessed with the murders and the serial killer at the center, or possible serial killer, I should say, William. I think it really analyzes just dating culture. Was this something intentional as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things in writing this novel is I really wanted to focus on the condition of the millennial woman in particular. I graduated from college in 2010, right into a recession. A lot of my friends are attractive, smart, friendly people who really struggled to get their footing beneath them. And that includes both like the workplace, like a lot of my friends struggled to get jobs just because we were in a recession and there weren't any jobs. And it didn't matter that they had college degrees or had all these accolades, like they just weren't there, right? So we all started off at this worse financial place than our parents. And then dating, there's a lot of conversation lately about how horrible it is to date right now. Back before I met my husband, this is just when things like OkCupid and dating apps were starting to get popular. And so there's this like weird sense of dating should be easier, but it's not. Like it's really hard to make a connection with people. It seems as a woman, it doesn't matter like how good looking you are or how successful you are. Men just really don't want to commit to relationships. And it makes you feel crazy when you're like, wait a minute, why was this man who said all these nice things to me, he doesn't want to call me his girlfriend, or like any kind of commitment makes him run away. It's this very frustrating situation. And it's a pattern that I see repeated again and again, where you can take like the most beautiful, successful person in the world, but then like men are like, oh no, I'm not going to be your boyfriend. We're just sleeping together. And I think it does drive people to do things that they wouldn't ordinarily do, like fall in love with serial killers.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. It makes you do different things. It makes you do maybe things you never thought you would do. And one of which, in this case for Hannah, is fall in love with a serial killer. Okay, so even though I know we're here to chat about your new book, Love Letters to a Serial Killer, I want to know what you're reading. And I'm sure our listeners are fascinated too. So share with us some of your favorite true crime books. Now, this can be fiction or nonfiction, but what are some of your favorites?
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier in the show that I really like older true crime. And I think that newer true crime is a little bit more ethical in terms of how it treats the victims, right? So like a big discussion is, oh, maybe we should focus on like the people that have been killed, who are a lot of times come from marginalized groups instead of holding up these killers. But I can't sometimes help but read these older true crime books that maybe do have those ethical issues. So I mentioned The Stranger Beside Me, which is by Anne Rule, who worked with Ted Bundy at a call center. Helter Skelter, which is about Charles Manson and the Manson girls. There's a book, Fatal Vision, which actually inspired a whole bunch of other books because it brought up a question of journalistic ethics when you are reporting on a crime like that. Because the author, he went to the prison and talked to this man who was accused of burning down his house with his family inside. And the man was like, oh, I thought you were going to declare me innocent. And that's why I agreed to share this with you. And then through the course of their conversations, the man, oh no, wait a minute. What if he's guilty? And so like multiple books were spawned from Fatal Vision. And I really enjoyed that conversation that happens within these texts. And I have to say that even though maybe some of the other texts were more factually accurate, the original is just so engaging and fun to read. I also, speaking about Ted Bundy and his victims, I really loved Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll, which focuses on someone who witnessed Bundy commit a murder and the trials and tribulations that she's put through after her witnessing him. I thought that was a really great book that does focus on the victims rather than holding up Bundy himself. So those are some of the true crime books that I'm reading. I have a launch reading coming up on the 25th, and I'm talking with Joshua Moline, who writes thrillers that are set in a small town in Minnesota, which is where both of us live. So I recently read And There He Kept Her and Where the Dead Sleep. And those books are about a gay detective who moves to this small town to join the force after the person he was dating in Minnesota was killed. And so those books are great, and I definitely recommend those.
Awesome. What books are you looking forward to reading in the year ahead?
I'm obviously looking forward to the new Sally Rooney, like a lot of people.
Yes.
I would say that's the one that I am most looking forward to reading in the coming year.
So I have to ask you, I have to cut you off. Backtrack. Did you read Sally's previous 3 books?
Yes.
What book of the 3 is your absolute favorite?
I think Normal People is my favorite.
My favorite is Beautiful World, Where Are You? I don't know. I'm a sucker for that one. It's so good.
Yeah, I thought that one was really interesting. I was like, how much of this is autobiographical? Just like in the conversations about like fame and being a writer and like what that looks like. I think I liked the ending of Normal People cracked me up because at the end, he goes to get his MFA in the US. And I also have an MFA. And I think in the book, they make it sound like this like big, amazing achievement. And I feel like for me, I just went and got my MFA and like, I wrote a lot, but I also partied for 4 years. Like I'm not necessarily a big partier. I'm a big nerd. I went to a really small college for undergrad. I like read and write all the time, but I went to a really large university in the South, the University of Alabama, to get my my MFA. And they have just a really big like drinking culture there. And so I had a lot of fun while I got my MFA. And I did get a lot of writing done and I learned some stuff. But most of the time I was there, I don't know that I was necessarily like an amazing scholar.
I love the honesty. That is awesome. I think that was like for undergrad for me, I think the last 2 years, oh my gosh, I was living it up. It was awesome. I think the first year was an adjustment.
I think that's what people should do. I also later got my PhD. And when I got my PhD, I was very studious because by that point I was like married. I was in my 30s. And so I like didn't go out and do anything. I was just like reading all the time. So I feel like people need these experiences where they're having fun and not just like studying.
Yeah, that is so true. Okay, so getting back to your book, Love Letters to a Serial Killer. Again, I know you've done your job, you've written the book, you've given it to us. Now it's up to readers to read the book and make their own assessments and decide whether, okay, are we Team Hannah? Are we supporting Hannah? Are we condemning Hannah? What are our takes on serial killer culture? I think dating culture is a big one. Millennial life, like you mentioned, which is very much at the center of this book. But of course, we get like thrills and chills and twists in this book as well. But what are you hoping readers might think or feel after they've turned the last page?
I really want people to have fun. So when I got an agent, I was pregnant. And I went on maternity leave early because I was teaching at the university level. So the semester ended and I wasn't due for a couple more months. So I really didn't have a lot to do, but I was very stressed out because my pregnancy was very stressful. And so I was doing a lot of reading and I kept reading these books that were duds. And I was like, I think I can get this book published. I'm going to try to get an agent. And I had written other novels before that are just like sitting in files on my computer. But I was like, I really like this one. I think it should be published. And so I just sat down and I queried an agent every day for a month and a half until I got one. And what I was looking for, like what I really wanted that I hope this book does is I wanted it to be funny, but I also wanted it to have some mystery. And I also wanted it to be somewhat relatable. But I think Hannah's a divisive character. Like in some ways she is very relatable and likable. In other ways you're like, oh no, what are you doing? And I want that too, right? I don't think that we should just have these characters that act perfect all the time because I know that I'm not perfect all the time as a human. The number one thing, I want people to have fun, but I also want them to experience some moments of anxiety along with Hannah and experience some of the mystery of, oh my gosh, did he do it? Do I want him to do it? Do I love serial killers? What's going on? Yeah, so fun is the number one thing.
Hey, I love that. I can fairly say I had lots of fun with Love Letters to a Serial Killer, and I had even more fun chatting with you today, Tasha. So thank you so much for coming on the show and speaking with me. It was fun.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to the Reader's Couch podcast. Please subscribe to the show, share it with a friend, and take a few seconds to leave a rating and review. Until next time, stay lounging, stay reading, and whenever you're in doubt, go straight to your local bookstore or library. Thanks again for listening, and happy reading.